Okay, now we've finished all our blocks, what we need to do next is trim them down to 18.5 inches square. So in the instructions for the handout for this quilt, I did suggest that you purchase the Creative Grids 18.5 inch square. It's a fantastic ruler and it is perfect for these blocks and for pillows, cushions, that kind of thing. So I'm going to trim one block using the 18.5 inch ruler, and then I'll show you how to do it if perhaps you've only got a 6 by 24 inch ruler. So first things first, I'm looking on the ruler. We have markings at the halfway point. I'm going to line those up with the markings on my block that we used for the applique placement. So get the centre ones done, and then we're going to look to do these middle ones. There we go. And the final check is just to check that this diagonal line on the ruler is running straight through the centre of the stem on this particular block. And then we can just trim. Okay. And I'm going to rotate this block so that I can chop the other sides down now. And again, we'll just reposition that ruler. Apologies for the glare from my lamp, but it's November in England. That means dark and grey pretty much any time of day. So I need additional lighting all the time in my sewing room. There we go. Let's move those bits out of the way. Last edge there. Oops, just missed that corner. There we go. So that's my block trimmed down to 18.5 inches square. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that for all of the blocks in the quilt. And before we move on to the next stage, which is joining our blocks into rows. So that's with the 18.5 inch Creative Grids ruler. It's CGR 1818, if anybody's interested. I'll show you now on another block how you can do it if you've just got a larger 6 by 24. So the larger ruler there. Okay. Let's trim this nice marigold block down. Okie dokie. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just looking to see and make sure that I can still see the central registration marks on my block. So we've got one here. These ones I've quilted, so I can see these ones easily, but just at the side you can still perhaps see the creases from where I pressed the background square before appliquing the pieces. So we're going to find our midpoint. Because we want to trim this down to 18.5 inches, we want to be measuring 9.25 inches away from the centre point. So I'm just going to grab that, align the ruler up there, and just make a point, a little mark there at 9.25 inches. And I want to do the same in the opposite direction from the centre. Again, we can line up the 9.25 inch line and just make a mark there. And we do this all the way around. There we go. So what I'm going to do is just join, be able to see this. Yeah, we can just see this. So I've got this mark here, this mark here. I'm just going to draw, just using a regular pencil because I'm going to be cutting on this line as well. I'm just going to join these lines up with thin. We could use a friction pen or something, but anything just so I can see the outline there. Because what's going to happen in a second, we'll do the same there and there. Once we start to trim off the opposite sides, we won't be able to see these markings anymore. So I'm just going to make a note of them, if you like, by drawing them on block. There we go. So that is my 18.5 inches. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this long edge first. We could mark all 4 sides if you want to with your pencil. That's absolutely fine. But I'm just going to use my ruler now to match up the markings and just trim off that one side. Okay, and I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. So I'm right-handed, so I always protect the piece, if you like, with the ruler. So I always cut with my block underneath the ruler. Just line that one up there. Make sure we've got that. And there we go. And now you can see, because we marked those lines, I can still see where I need to be cutting for these final two sides. And we can just double check again by checking that my ruler is lining up nicely on the block. One side, and let's do the other. And I'm using a ruler here to line up with the edge of the block, one of the markings on the ruler, and then again just lining up with that drawn line. And there we go. So that's how you can do it if you don't have the 18.5-inch ruler. And let's just do a quick sense check, just to be sure. Make sure that that is all adding up. And we've got 18.5 inches across. So that corresponds with the markings on the mat as well. There we go. So trim down all your blocks down to 18.5 inches square, and then next phase we're going to start joining these blocks into rows so we can apply our sashings. So I'm here at my machine and I'm just butting the two blocks together, the raw edges up together, and I'm sewing slowly with a wide zigzag. On my machine it's a Janome, and so my width is 5mm and it's 2.5 long. Okay, so I'm back from the machine. I've joined my middle row of blocks together using the wide zigzag. I'll show you a little bit more detail. You can see what that looks like. A nice wide zigzag against those butted edges. That's joined those blocks now. They're nice and strong, but it is pretty unsightly, especially on the back, because I've used contrasting thread so you could see it. So what we need to do now is to apply our sashing strips that we made earlier. We're going to apply those to basically hide those joins and make it look a lot prettier. So the first side we're going to tackle is actually the rear, the back of the quilt. So I'm going to turn my blocks over. Here we go, and just fold these edges in so that I can fit them on my work desk. We need to cover these joins with the narrower of the sashing strips that we made. Let's have a look. There we go. So these are the sashing strips which finish at 1 inch. We're going to use those to cover that join there and there. Now I normally do this by machine, but you are more than welcome to do this by hand. You would just use a slip stitch, much the same as if you were hand stitching down a binding. I'm going to do it by machine, 1 for speed, 2 for strength. So I'm going to grab my good old Roxanne's glue base stick glue. I'm just going to fold back the sashing strip. I should point out it is the wrong sides down, so the folded edges are facing the block. And I'm actually going to use this centre point where the raw edges are folded into the centre. I'm going to line that up with the join here that I've zigzagged over by machine. And I'm just going to apply a few spots of the applique glue either side of that zigzag. Another zigzag, I suppose, but with glue this time. And then we're just going to gently lay the sashing down and kind of eyeballing. I'm using the centre point. I'm lining that up with the stitching to make sure that I cover the join. And then we'll just allow that to dry. And I'm using a contrasting sashing on the back of the quilt this time. On the original quilt, I used the same fabric for the sashing that I'd used for the back of the blocks. So you couldn't see the sashing strips on the back of the quilt at all. But this time I thought I'd make a feature of it. And there we go, we're going to pull that back. Again, just make sure we're lining up. And if you wanted to, you could press the glue dry if you're in a real rush, or you can just let that glue dry naturally, which is what I'm going to do, and I'll work on this other side as well. And then once the glue is dry, I'm going to take it back to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to top stitch either side of the sashing, probably about an eighth of an inch, between an eighth of an inch and a quarter of an inch. Obviously the raw edges are all enclosed because we folded those to the centre, but I do want to make sure it doesn't fall off. There we go, and just go back down this side. Okay, we're just making sure we're trying to line that up best we can with the join. And there we go. Like I say, let the glue dry. You could now hand stitch these sashing strips down on both sides, or if you want to, like me, you can take it to the sewing machine and just run a line of stitching about an eighth of an inch from either side. So let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, back at the sewing machine now, and we're going to be top stitching our sashing strips on the back of the quilt blocks. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change my foot on my sewing machine. I'm going to change over to use a ditch quilting foot or a top stitching foot. So you can see here I have a central guide bar. I'm going to use that to help me stitch a really accurate top stitch down the edge of my sashing strips. So we'll just change that foot over. Like I say, if you have one, pop it on your machine. If not, just take your time. You don't need a special foot to do this. Okie doke, let's bring the quilt over now. Here we go. Here is my sashing on the back. It's a bit bright, I do apologise again. We've got extra lighting so I can actually see. So now we're going to ride the edge of this foot along the edge of this sashing. And again, I am using a contrasting thread here. It should stand out. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. I'm using a navy thread. And I have navy in the bobbin as well, so you'll be able to see on the front of my quilt where that stitching is. So I'm just going to select a straight stitch on my machine. Yeah, let's just do that, undo that. Okay, so I'm going to a reasonably long stitch length. I'm going to go with 3, and I'm just going to adjust my needle ever so slightly over so that I just catch the edge. Look how that's going to look. Just catch the edge of that sashing. Coming a little bit more. There we go, we'll go with that. Right, so it's slow and steady with this one. There's no need to race. We just want to slowly stitch along this edge and secure the sashing. And the whole while we're just keeping this guide right along the edge of this sashing here. And there we go. If I take that off now, can you see? We can see this top stitch. Like I say, it is very dark because I'm using a contrast thread for yourself, so you can see it in the video. And then on the front side, you can see we've got navy in the bobbin. You can see that stitching. So now I'm going to turn the block around. I'm going to stitch down on the opposite side of the sashing, and it will be completely secured to my quilt. And there we go. You can see now both sides are secured to the quilt, and on the front of the quilt you can see we have a line of stitching either side of that central join. Okay, I'm back from the machine. I have top stitched down both sides of the sashings on the back of my quilt, and if I turn it over to the front now, you can see I've used a contrasting thread so you can see this. We have 2 lines of stitching now, either side of that central join. And so now what we need to do is basically we need to hide this stitching. And we're going to do that with our second set of sashing strips, which measure 1 1/4 inches finished. And if we lay those just quickly over the top there, look, you can see that we hide all of that stitching that was joining our blocks and attaching that sashing on the rear of the quilt. And so we're going to add this sashing in exactly the same way that we did on the back. We just need to make sure, one, if you're doing this, that your bobbin thread matches the backing fabric, because you're going to be stitching either side, you will have a visible line of stitching. So unlike obviously the sashing on the back where we're hiding that stitching, this stitching will be visible on the back of your quilt. That's if you stitch it by machine. If you want to, for this part of the assembly process, you could hand stitch this sashing down on the front only, and that way there will be no visible lines of stitching. So do exactly what we did on the back of the quilt, we're just going to do it on the front. Okay, so I now have 2 of my 3 rows joined together. I now want to join the 2 rows to start forming the main quilt. So as you can see, I'm just lining up the rows so that these edges match, where the 2 sashing strips are, they match. And I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and just like we did with the blocks, I'm going to zigzag these 2 rows together with a long, reasonably wide zigzag stitch, and then we'll come back and we'll cover the back of the section with sashing, and then we will stitch that down, and then we'll flip it to the front and we'll cover the front section with another sashing strip. So let's head to the machine. I'm just starting to stitch these together with a zigzag now. It is starting to get a bit more cumbersome now we're getting the larger sections together, but it's only a small amount we have to do, so we persevere and just take it slow and steady. So just about to enter the shot now is the sashing between the first set of blocks. So I'm just going to make sure that these sashing strips line up as I stitch together. A little bit of readjustment required to get the bulk under my machine, but we're there. Just making sure that these sashing strips are meeting. And we will hide that join with another sashing strip in just a moment. And there we go, all joined.